My name is Emily, and for 15 years I lived a double life that nobody in my family could imagine. If you think secrets fade with time, you are wrong. Some grow larger, some transform into shadows so heavy they press against your chest each morning. And mine was about to explode in front of the very people who had called me a failure. It all began with a single envelope lying on my desk. The gold letters shimmered under the early sunlight pouring through the tall windows of my penthouse. An invitation. The Sullivan family reunion. For most families, reunions are warm events, hugs, laughter, stories. For me, they were cages. They were reminders of every cutting word, every dismissive look, every time I was told that my art was nothing more than a childish phase. But this year was different. This year, the invitation carried a timer ticking in my mind. Because I knew in less than 48 hours the world would learn who I truly was. Not a struggling artist, not the poor relative who drove an old Honda and wore faded jeans. No, they would discover that the sister they pitied had quietly built a digital empire worth billions. The trigger was not my choice. A magazine had already prepared the headline, Forbes 30 Under 40 Emily Sullivan, the digital art visionary, whose NFT empire now holds a valuation of $3.8 billion. Tomorrow morning that headline would appear online. By then, my phone would ring non-stop. By then, my parents, my brother Marcus, my sister Olivia, and every cousin who ever smirked at me would know. The deception I had carried like armor for more than a decade was about to shatter. I stood by the window, Manhattan stretched below like a glittering map of power and money. My reflection stared back, tailored silk, flawless makeup, the look of success I never allowed them to see. How ironic that the family who laughed at my choices would now choke on the truth. 15 years earlier, I was 22, fresh from college, with a finance degree my father insisted on. He had a plan. Marcus would join his investment firm, Olivia would flaunt her six-figure salary, and I was supposed to slide into the firm, a dutiful daughter crunching numbers. But I refused. I loved art. I loved technology. And when I discovered blockchain, I saw a horizon none of them could. That decision came with a price. My father's voice had thundered across the dinner table. Digital art is not real art. You are wasting your life. My mother's pitying smile followed, sweetheart. Just take the safe job. Stability matters. Even my siblings joined the chorus. Marcus smirked. Olivia rolled her eyes. That night I realized I was alone. So I left. I moved into a cramped studio in Brooklyn, with peeling paint and pipes that rattled in the night. To them, it looked like struggle. To me, it was freedom. The freedom to sketch digital visions until dawn, to code, to experiment, to sell my first collection for $50,000. I never told them. I let them believe what they wanted. Each Christmas, they whispered that I was chasing a dream too fragile to last. Each reunion, they reminded me of my poor choices. And each time I smiled, nodded, and went back to building an empire they could not see. Now, years later, my secret had grown into something I could no longer hide. Private jets, 3 helicopters, an island in the Caribbean, all masked behind a life of simplicity whenever I stood near them. I had crafted the illusion carefully, but tomorrow it would end. I touched the envelope again. The gold letters no longer felt like chains. They felt like an invitation to war. At that reunion, surrounded by chandeliers and smug smiles, I would finally stand as myself. No more shadows, no more silence, only truth. And truth can cut sharper than any blade. The stage was set. My family believed I was still the dreamer who had lost her way. In less than 2 days, they would see the empire I had built while they weren't looking. The phone on my desk would not stop vibrating. Each buzz was another reminder that the veil had already begun to tear. My brother Marcus had been calling since dawn, his name flashing across the screen again and again. I knew what he wanted. He had probably seen the press release the whispers in the business world about a Sullivan whose net worth rivaled entire corporations. Finally, I answered, "Hello, Marcus." His voice exploded through the line. "What the hell, Emily? I just got a call from Business Insider asking about my billionaire sister. Care to explain?" I leaned back in my chair, the Manhattan skyline stretching wide behind me. My silence was deliberate. "You'll know soon enough. Wait for the article." "Cut the act," he snapped. "All these years you let us think you were barely scraping by. Mom and Dad have been worried sick about you." A laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Worried. That's what you call the constant lectures, the reminders that I was wasting my degree, the jokes about my so-called hobby. They were trying to help, Marcus muttered. "No, they were trying to control me, and you let them. You followed the script." The other end of the line went silent. I knew he hated hearing that truth. Marcus was the golden son, the one who had marched obediently into our father's firm, the one who carried the family's legacy like a badge of honor. But the truth was he had never dared to imagine more. Finally, his voice came back softer. "How long, Emily? How long have you been hiding this?" I walked to the glass wall of my penthouse. A helicopter drifted across the skyline. Mine, one of 3. Remember when I moved into that tiny studio in Brooklyn that was 15 years ago? I could almost hear him calculating, replaying the years when he thought I was starving while he thrived. He thought he had been the strong one, but it was me. It had always been me. "You borrowed money for rent?" he said, his voice cracking. "No, Marcus. I asked them to invest in my company. They refused loudly, repeatedly. The old car, the small apartment, those were choices. Just like this penthouse and the jet are choices. You never saw beyond the surface." Silence again, this time heavier. "So how rich are you?" I let the question hang. Then I answered clear and calm. "The Forbes article will say 3.8 billion. The truth is closer to 5. The sound he made was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. I imagined his face, the perfect son, realizing he had been blind while his sister quietly built an empire. "I have a meeting," I said finally. "I'll see you at the reunion." And before he could respond, I hung up. I pressed the intercom. "Sarah, is everything ready for the reunion?" "Yes, Miss Sullivan. The jet is fueled, the Rolls Royces are booked. The island resort, staff has signed NDAs. Perfect." I held the invitation again, tracing the gold letters. For 15 years, I had let them see only the version of me they wanted to believe in, the struggling artist, the black sheep, who never lived up to the family name. But that mask had served its purpose. It had bought me time to build, without interference. Now the mask was falling away. The reunion would not be another night of polite pity and smug smiles. It would be my stage, and they would sit there speechless as I revealed everything. For a moment I closed my eyes. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from anticipation. The years of silence were ending. The truth would arrive like a storm, and storms cannot be ignored. What? If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, you know this feeling. Before I continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever been dismissed? Told your dreams were worthless? Share your story below. And if you want to follow the rest of mine, make sure you subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Because what happens at that reunion will change everything. When the call with Marcus ended, I sat quietly for a moment, staring at the invitation on my desk. The weight of gold embossing was nothing compared to the weight of expectation my family had tried to chain me with. They had never wanted me to think for myself. They had wanted me obedient, like Marcus, like Olivia. My father had always been the architect of that plan. From the time we were children, he mapped out every milestone. Marcus would be the heir to his investment firm. Olivia, with her charm, would enter corporate life, climb quickly, and flaunt her 6-figure salary as proof of success. And me, I was supposed to follow quietly, maybe manage client portfolios, nothing more. I remember those family dinners vividly, crystal glasses filled with wine that I never liked, conversations circling the stock market, quarterly returns, acquisitions. My father's voice booming about safe investments, my mother nodding along her pearls, catching the light. Marcus, sitting taller each year, eager to prove he was the chosen one. Olivia, proud of her paycheck, boasting about trips to the Hamptons and designer handbags. And me, the silent outlier. They looked at me with the same expression every time, disappointment wrapped in pity. To them, I was the sister who had wasted her Ivy League finance degree, the daughter who was too stubborn to recognize the right path, the dreamer who needed to grow up. At reunions, the judgment was even sharper. Olivia would deliberately pick up the check at dinners, flashing a smug smile while whispering, "I'll cover Emily's share." Marcus would ask if I had finally come to my senses and considered joining the firm. My father would remind me in front of everyone that stability mattered more than passion. My mother would tilt her head and sigh. "We just want what's best for you." But best meant control. It meant obedience. Every word, every smirk, every sigh had burned itself into my memory, and each burn became fuel. I realized early that my family worshipped one definition of success, their definition. Safe, predictable, measured. They had no room for vision, no respect for risks. They believed innovation was fantasy, and anyone chasing it was doomed to fail. That was why I chose silence. Why I let them see only the old car, the small apartment, the secondhand clothes. Because if I showed them the truth too soon, they would tear it apart, call it reckless, maybe even try to drag me back into their cage. So I played the role they gave me, the struggling artist, the black sheep. I let Marcus shine in his tailored suits. I let Olivia brag about her vacations. I let my parents parade their golden children while pretending not to notice me at the edge of the room. And in the shadows, I built something none of them could imagine. Still, I would be lying if I said their words didn't sting. There were nights I lay awake in that cramped studio in Brooklyn, replaying my father's booming dismissal, my mother's sighs, my siblings' laughter. Nights when I questioned if I had made a mistake. Nights when I nearly believed them. But then I would turn back to my screen, back to the glowing world of digital art, and I would remember vision takes time. Innovation requires solitude, and freedom is worth every ounce of pain. That truth became my compass, and while my family celebrated their safe victories, I prepared to redefine what success really meant. Have you ever been the outlier in your own family, the one who never fit their script? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your story, because sometimes the ones who stand alone are the ones who see the farthest. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps me share every hidden chapter. The stage for my revelation was growing clearer. The more I thought about the reunion, the more I realized it would not just be a gathering, it would be a reckoning. The memories of that pivotal night have never left me. I was 22, sitting at the long mahogany dining table under the glow of the chandelier, my family gathered in their usual formation. My father sat at the head commanding, as always, his voice the law of the household. He had asked about my plans, expecting me to say I would join his firm. Instead, I told him the truth. I sold my first digital art collection, I said, $50,000, and I'm working on more. His response was sharp, dismissive, final. Digital art isn't real art. This NFT nonsense is a scam. Either you work at the firm, or you are on your own. The words sliced through me. I remember gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles white, while my mother reached across, patting my hand with condescension. Sweetheart, stability matters. You need a real career. My brother Marcus smirked as though my failure had been proven. Olivia rolled her eyes and leaned back in her chair, smug in her certainty that her six-figure salary made her superior. Their judgment filled the room thick and suffocating. That was the moment everything crystallized. I realized that if I wanted freedom, true freedom, I would have to claim it myself. There would be no support, no safety net, no guiding hand. Only me, my vision, and my determination. So I stood up from the table. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded. You're right, I need to figure this out on my own. My father's eyes narrowed, certain that his ultimatum would scare me into compliance. My mother looked wounded, Marcus amused, Olivia dismissive. But I did not falter. 2 weeks later, I packed what little I had and moved into the smallest studio apartment I could find in Brooklyn. It was a place no one envied, peeling paint pipes that clanged at night, a mattress on the floor. To them, it looked like defeat. To me, it was liberation. The tiny apartment became my workshop, my refuge. The old Honda I drove was not a symbol of failure, but of independence. Every creak of that car reminded me that I was free. The first year was brutal. 18-hour days hunched over my laptop, sketching digital visions, coding, learning blockchain inside and out. I poured every ounce of myself into creation. When my first major collection, Digital Dreams in Binary, sold out in hours and earned $1.2 million, I cried, not from exhaustion, but from vindication. I invested it all back into the business, hired developers, built platforms for other artists. I refused to be small. I refused to be what they told me to be. And yet each time I returned home for holidays, I played my role perfectly. I wore plain clothes, kept the old car, smiled politely as they asked if I was doing okay. My mother would offer to help with rent. My father would shake his head at my stubbornness. Olivia would cover dinner with theatrical generosity. Marcus would brag about quarterly returns. And I would thank them, nodding like a humbled daughter. What they never saw was the empire I was quietly building behind the curtain. It hurt to hear their words, to be dismissed, to be pitied. But in that pain, I found clarity. Their doubt became my drive. Their disdain became my armor. That night at the dining table, when my father gave me his ultimatum, he thought he was ending my future. In truth, he lit the fire that would carry me beyond anything they could imagine. That night I chose the harder road, the lonelier road, but it was mine. And every success since has been rooted in that single decision. The thought of the reunion stirred something deep inside me. They still believed I was the struggling dreamer. They had no idea that the dreamer had already conquered the world they dismissed. The time for shadows was ending. The reckoning was coming. I still remember the sting of leaving that dining table and walking into a future that no one in my family believed in. The first year was the hardest. The Brooklyn studio was small, drafty, and often smelled of rust from the old pipes. My mattress was thin, the walls thin enough to hear my neighbors arguing late into the night. But that tiny space became my kingdom. It was where I forged the path they thought would break me. At first, my victories were quiet. The $50,000 from my first NFT collection felt like a miracle. When the next collection sold for $200,000, I began to realize this was more than luck, it was proof of concept. By the time my father announced at Christmas dinner that I was going through a silly phase, I had already earned my first million. But I didn't tell them. I let them believe the story they wanted to see. The girl who was too proud to admit defeat. The sister who scraped by. The daughter who lived in denial. Every time they shook their heads, I smiled and thought of the growing numbers in my bank account. I spent sleepless nights learning blockchain architecture, networking with early adopters, building connections with developers. I taught myself to see opportunities where others only saw confusion. When my collection Digital Dreams in Binary sold out in hours and brought in $1.2 million, I reinvested everything, hired developers, built platforms, pushed boundaries. But to the world outside, especially my family, I stayed invisible. I kept the Honda with the squeaky brakes. I wore jeans I had bought years before. I ate simple meals. When my mother offered to help with rent, I declined politely. When Olivia made a show of paying for dinner, I thanked her with a smile. It was theater, and I played my part well. There was power in their underestimation. If they saw my success too soon, they would try to cage it, control it, claim it. So I let them see only what confirmed their beliefs. And in that freedom, my empire grew. By the end of my first year, I was worth $10 million. By year 3, $100 million. Still, they thought I was struggling. Their ignorance became my shield, their arrogance my camouflage. Sometimes at night, lying awake in that studio, I would replay my father's ultimatum. Either you work at the firm or you are on your own. I realized then that being on my own was not a punishment, it was a gift. For the first time, I was steering my life without their hands on the wheel. That clarity hardened into resolve. And with each passing year, the secret grew heavier, but so did my determination. I wasn't just proving them wrong anymore. I was proving myself right. So, if you believe in building quietly until you can't be ignored, let me know. Drop a comment, share your story. And if you're here because you know how sweet hidden victories can be, make sure you subscribe. Together, we'll keep uncovering the truths behind the masks we're forced to wear. Because sometimes the greatest power comes from silence, and silence, when it breaks, can shake the world. I learned quickly that secrecy was an art of its own. My fortune grew with each passing year, but the act of appearing broke became as important as the empire I was building. To my family, I was still the black sheep with her little art hobby. To me, I was a strategist playing the longest game of my life. The old Honda became my disguise. Its engine rattled like bones every time I started it. But that sound gave me cover. My family would nod, knowingly convinced it proved their version of my life. The tiny Brooklyn apartment remained my stage. Its peeling paint and clanging pipes convinced everyone that I was still struggling. I never corrected them. Instead, I leaned into the illusion. When Olivia swept into restaurants pulling out her credit card with theatrical grace, I let her. "Don't worry, Emily, I've got this," she would say, her voice loud enough for the whole table. I thanked her every time. Let her feel magnanimous. Let her believe she was saving her pitiful sister. Each time I smiled, knowing the champagne she flaunted cost less than the interest I earned in a single day. Marcus was no better. He carried himself with the smugness of the golden child, repeating my father's words about real careers and responsibility. Whenever I visited home, he would ask, "Have you finally thought about joining the firm?" His voice dripped with superiority. I would shake my head, laugh lightly, and let him think I was too stubborn to admit defeat. My parents remained the most predictable. My father's disappointment was constant, heavy as a hammer. He would shake his head when I entered the room, as if my very presence proved I had failed him. My mother, softer but no less condescending, would offer help. "Let us cover your rent, sweetheart. You can't live like this forever." I declined politely each time. Not once did it occur to her that I wasn't struggling at all. Their blindness was almost shocking. They never came to my shows, never researched my work, never once Googled my name. They accepted the illusion because it confirmed their belief that I was the one child who had fallen short. And in their arrogance, they gave me the greatest gift, freedom. I used that freedom well. Behind the curtain, my empire stretched larger each year. My net worth crossed $10 million by the end of the first year. Within 3 years, it soared past $100 million. By the time Olivia boasted about her second vacation home in the Hamptons, I had quietly acquired properties across 3 continents. And still I drove that Honda. Still I lived in that Brooklyn studio. Still I let them see only the theater I had crafted for them. The secrecy was not always easy. There were nights when I wanted to reveal the truth. Nights when the weight of pretending pressed hard against my chest. But I reminded myself that masks protect, masks hide, masks buy time. And time was what I needed to create something so undeniable, so massive, that no amount of dismissal could erase it. Every holiday dinner, every reunion became another act in the play. They thought they saw me clearly, but in reality they were looking at shadows while the real story unfolded far away. And with every passing year, the secret became harder to contain. The empire grew louder, brighter, bigger. Journalists began circling, investors came knocking, opportunities piled at my door. I knew eventually the mask would have to come off, but not yet, not until I chose the moment. So I smiled, kept my Honda polished, just enough to run, and returned each holiday to sit quietly at the table where I had once been dismissed. Let them believe, let them laugh. The longer they underestimated me, the sweeter the reveal would become. The illusion of poverty had become second nature by the time my empire began to explode. What started as modest gains turned into a tidal wave of success that even I sometimes struggled to process. My company expanded beyond anything I had originally dreamed. My platforms connected thousands of artists across the world. Partnerships with tech innovators, collectors, and institutions stacked on top of each other. The numbers no longer felt real, only the momentum did. When Digital Dreams and Binary sold out in hours and brought in $1.2 million, I thought it was lightning in a bottle. But lightning struck again and again until I realized I was no longer chasing the storm. I was the storm. I reinvested every cent. I built infrastructure, hired experts, created tools that revolutionized how digital art was shared and sold. By the end of my first year, my net worth was $10 million. By the third year, it reached $100 million. Soon after, I crossed the threshold into billionaire territory, though no one in my family suspected a thing. To them, I was still the eccentric dreamer in a drafty apartment with a beat-up car. The contrast was surreal. By day, I walked through marble lobbies, sat in boardrooms, signed contracts worth millions. By night, I drove the Honda back to my Brooklyn studio, parking between rusted bicycles and broken trash bins. To outsiders, it looked like sacrifice. To me, it was camouflage. But with every leap forward, keeping the mask in place grew harder. Journalists began whispering. Investors I had once pitched to, who had laughed at me now, sent proposals begging for a meeting. Galleries that once rejected me called non-stop. I had built something undeniable, and the cracks in my disguise widened. I began to fear the truth slipping out before I was ready. A careless photo, a leaked document, one article too curious about the mystery founder behind the platforms. And still each holiday I returned home, slipping into my role like a costume, smiling at Olivia's boasts, nodding at Marcus's condescension, enduring my father's disappointment. They had no idea that while they pitied me, I was buying properties in cities they bragged about visiting. They didn't know that while Olivia flashed her six-figure salary, I was making that much in minutes. They couldn't imagine that their failing daughter had already surpassed their combined achievements. And that made the secret intoxicating. Every insult they delivered was fuel. Every sigh, every smirk, every reminder that I wasn't successful enough added weight to the victory I was preparing. I wasn't just building wealth. I was building the stage for the day I would finally remove the mask. But sometimes late at night when the city outside was quiet, I wondered what it would feel like when the truth finally came out. Would they rage? Would they beg? Would they deny? Or would they finally see me, not as the black sheep, but as the visionary I had always been? The anticipation grew with every passing year. And when the Forbes article loomed on the horizon, I knew the waiting was almost over. So, what about you? Have you ever kept a secret so powerful that revealing it would change everything? A secret that made people underestimate you, only for the truth to be so much greater than they imagined? Share your story in the comments, and if you want to stay with me until the very end of mine, subscribe now. There's so much more to tell. The storm was gathering, and once it broke, there would be no going back. The countdown began the morning I received the official notice from Forbes. The headline was already drafted, the article finalized, my photograph chosen carefully to convey both elegance and power. It would go live at 6 o'clock in the morning 2 days before the reunion. I stared at the preview on my laptop, sipping coffee from a porcelain cup that probably cost more than Olivia's monthly rent. The words glowed across the screen: Forbes 30 under 40, Emily Sullivan, the digital art visionary whose NFT empire now holds a valuation of $3.8 billion. There it was, 15 years of silence condensed into one sentence. I leaned back in my chair, watching the Manhattan skyline beyond the glass. I had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was close, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, not even pride, but anticipation. The years of being pitied were ending. The girl they dismissed as a failure was about to become a headline the entire world would read. My phone buzzed again. Marcus, then Olivia, then both my parents. Their calls stacked on top of each other until my screen looked like a flashing alarm. I ignored them. If they wanted answers, they could wait until Forbes published the truth. I remembered every family dinner when Olivia had leaned across the table bragging about her six-figure salary. Every time she made sure the entire restaurant saw her helping me by paying the bill. I remembered Marcus always smug, always reminding me that real stability came from the firm. And my father so certain, so immovable in his belief that innovation was a fad. Soon all of it would collapse under the weight of undeniable evidence. Still, the reveal needed more than just a headline. I had spent months planning the stage for the reunion. The Rolls-Royces were booked to collect each family member. The The jet was polished, my company's emblem engraved on its side. The island resort was secured its staff, sworn to silence with ironclad contracts. Every detail was designed to shock. I wanted them to feel the shift the moment they arrived, to understand that while they had laughed at my choices, I had built something far greater than their imaginations allowed. I thought of Olivia's message from the night before. OMG, Emily, please tell me this Forbes thing is a joke. She had no idea how serious it was. I had ignored her text just as I ignored my mother's increasingly frantic voicemails. We need to talk. Call me back. This must be some mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake. It was history catching up. The morning of the article's release, I rose before dawn. The city was still dark, the air crisp. I brewed coffee and settled into my office screens, flickering awake around me. At exactly 6, the headline went live. Within minutes, my phone was on fire. Emails, calls, interview requests from every major outlet. My inbox flooded with proposals. Investment firms that had once turned me away now begged for partnerships. But none of it mattered more than the chaos unraveling in my family's group chat. Olivia, is this for real? 3.8 billion. Marcus, I tried to warn you all yesterday. Mom, Emily, please answer your phone. Dad, this must be some kind of mistake. Aunt Patricia, is our Emily really the Emily Sullivan in Forbes? I muted the chat, laughing quietly. They were panicking, scrambling. The narrative they had clung to for years had just disintegrated in front of them. I leaned back in my chair, the morning sun pouring into the room. 15 years of silence had ended in a single morning. And now, as the article spread across the world, I prepared for the next step, the confrontation waiting at the reunion. Because a headline was powerful, but nothing compared to looking them in the eye and showing them what they had ignored for so long. The storm had broken, and there was no going back. The Forbes article did more than reveal my wealth. It ripped open every lie my family had told themselves for 15 years. I sat in my office watching the chaos spread across screens. News anchors debated the future of digital art. Investors, who once mocked me, now begged for meetings. Messages poured in by the hundreds. But the ones that mattered most came from my family. My phone buzzed with another call, this time from my mother. I let it ring out, then watched the security feed as she appeared in the lobby of my building, arguing with the guards. Even from behind glass, I could see the disbelief in her eyes. Perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, yet unraveling inside. Let her up, I finally sighed. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped into my penthouse. She froze. Her eyes swept across the marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the Basquiat hanging casually on my wall. She turned slowly, as though every detail struck her like a blow. Emily, her voice was unsteady. What is all this? This, I said, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup, is my home. My real home. Not the studio I kept for your visits. Her lips parted in shock. She walked toward the window heels, clicking against the marble. How long? How did you? 15 years, I answered. Since the night Dad told me digital art was a scam. Her face twisted, confusion, hurt, denial. But you struggled. We saw it. The old car, the small apartment, borrowing money for rent. I never borrowed, I cut her off. I asked you and Dad to invest. That was different. Everything else, the car, the apartment, that was theater. And you never questioned it. You never wanted to. Her shoulders slumped. She sank into one of the Italian leather chairs, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. For the first time, she looked powerless. Does anyone else know? She whispered. Marcus found out yesterday. Olivia suspects. Dad refuses to believe it. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. Here. The investment opportunity I offered 3 years ago. If Dad had put in $1 million, it would be worth $100 million today. Her hands trembled as she took the file. He said you wanted a handout, that you were failing, and you believed him, just like you all believed the story you wanted to see. My voice was steady, now calm but sharp. Tell me, Mom. In 15 years, did any of you ever attend my shows, check my work, even search my name? She couldn't meet my eyes. That's what I thought. Silence filled the room. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, the truth stood between us like a wall. I turned back to the window. The reunion is in 2 days. I've made some changes to the arrangements. Her brow furrowed. Changes. I bought out the entire resort. Instead, everyone will be picked up by private cars and flown to my island in the Caribbean. That's where the reunion will be held. Her gasp echoed in the room. Your island? Yes, I bought it last year. And this time I won't be the one sitting quietly while everyone boasts about their so-called successes. This time I'll be speaking. She rose unsteadily, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. When your father sees this, when he sees all this, he'll have to admit. I smiled faintly, that his daughter playing with computer pictures built something greater than his entire legacy. Yes, he will. And that right there is where the story takes a sharp turn. You think the reveal has already begun, but the real confrontation, the storm that would shake every single member of my family, was still waiting. Stay with me, because what happened at the reunion was far more shocking than anything you've heard so far. The day of the reunion arrived like a stage set for a performance I had been rehearsing for over a decade. At dawn, I stood on the tarmac of my private airfield, the sky painted in shades of gold and gray. 3 gleaming Rolls-Royces approached in formation, engines purring, each carrying members of the family who had once laughed at me. The cars stopped, doors opened. One by one they emerged. My father stepped out first, shoulders, squared his usual authority dulled by unease. My mother followed, her eyes darting everywhere as if searching for proof this was real. Marcus, Olivia, and aunts, uncles, cousins trailed behind, their expressions twisted between awe and resentment. And waiting behind me like a silent proclamation was my jet. Its silver body gleamed under the morning sun, the words Sullivan Digital Empire emblazoned in elegant lettering across its side. Welcome, I said, my voice carrying across the tarmac. I trust the ride was comfortable. My father frowned. Emily, this is unnecessary. We could have had a perfectly fine reunion at the resort. The resort was too public, I answered with a smile. Besides, I think it's time for something more private, something real. Olivia clutched her handbag tighter, her voice sharp. Of course you have a jet. Of course you have an island. This is insane. But they boarded anyway. The crew welcomed them, serving vintage champagne and guiding them past art pieces mounted along the cabin walls. My Aunt Patricia gasped, whispering, "Is that a real Picasso?" "Yes," I replied casually, sipping from a crystal flute. "I bought it last year." My father cleared his throat. "Emily, perhaps we should talk about this privately." "We'll talk when we land," I interrupted. "For now, enjoy the flight. The champagne costs more than your company's quarterly profits." He flinched, his jaw tightening. I let the silence hang. 2 hours later, the island came into view through the oval windows. 300 acres of tropical paradise spread below us, turquoise waters circling pristine beaches. In the center stood the resort. I had commissioned modern architecture woven seamlessly with nature, and etched into the helipad in bold white paint, visible even from the sky, was my name. As we descended, Olivia gasped. Marcus muttered something under his breath. My father said nothing, but the tightness around his eyes betrayed him. The jet touched down, the doors opened. Warm air swept across the cabin as my family stepped out, stunned into silence. All around the helipad were digital displays cycling through my most successful NFT collections, each tagged with its record-breaking sale price. Numbers in the millions flashed like neon reminders of what they had dismissed. "Welcome to Sullivan Island," I announced, gesturing grandly, my little piece of paradise. The staff escorted them to their suites, each stocked with documents I had prepared. For my father, a timeline of every investment opportunity he had rejected, paired with their current valuations. For Olivia, a comparison of her annual salary against what I earned in daily interest. For Marcus, a detailed account of how his firm had lost millions by refusing to partner with me. I gave them an hour to absorb it all before summoning them to the main dining hall. The room was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a massive table set with cutlery worth more than most cars. Forbes articles framed elegantly across every wall. They filed in, slowly dressed for dinner, yet visibly shaken. Their clothes, their jewelry, all of it seemed small here. "Please," I said, motioning toward the table. "Sit. We have much to discuss." If you were in my position standing before a family that doubted you for years, what would you say first? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you would begin, because the words I chose that night changed everything. The air inside the dining hall was thick with tension. My family shuffled into their seats, their eyes scanning the walls where framed Forbes articles glimmered under soft light. Every detail had been designed to unsettle them. The ocean crashed against the shore just beyond the glass, but inside the room, the only sound was the scrape of chairs against marble. My father tried to reclaim control first. Emily, I think I speak for everyone when I say we're surprised. His voice carried that familiar tone of authority, though it trembled at the edges. Surprised, I echoed, letting the word linger. Not angry that I kept this from you, not hurt that I lived a double life, just surprised. No one answered. My mother finally spoke, her voice low. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected her. Every time I tried to share my work, you dismissed it. Every time I offered you opportunities to invest, you ignored them. You saw what you wanted to see, the struggling daughter, the failure who couldn't handle reality. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. But the apartment, the car, all those times you let me pay for dinner? Because you enjoyed it, I interrupted. You liked being the successful sister, the one who helped poor Emily. You made sure everyone saw you doing it. Don't deny it. Her face flushed and she looked away. I pressed a button on the remote I had hidden under the table. From the ceiling, sleek screens descended, flickering to life. My family gasped as the first images appeared, photographs of me standing beside my art headlines from early sales numbers, glowing bright against the dark background. Let me remind you, I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence. The first slide read, 2008. Dad, digital art isn't real art. Result, first NFT collection sells for $50,000. Another flickered across, 2010. Mom, when will you get a real job? Result, company valuation reaches $10 million. The next, 2015, Olivia. At least I can afford to help my sister out. Result, net worth surpasses $500 million. Then 2020, Dad's firm. We don't invest in internet pictures. Result, company valuation passes $1 billion. Each slide paired their dismissive words with the milestones I had achieved in secret. Each sentence they had once thrown at me came back to them magnified, undeniable. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus's jaw tightened. Olivia stared at her plate. My father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. My mother's eyes shimmered, though whether with shame or sorrow, I couldn't tell. I stood slowly walking toward the screens as the timeline continued. Every doubt, every insult, every patronizing smile. I remembered them all, and with each one I built something bigger. Why, my father finally asked, his voice cracking. Why hide it from us? I turned, meeting his gaze. Because you needed to learn. All of you. Success doesn't always look the way you imagine it. Innovation doesn't follow your safe little maps. And sometimes the child you dismiss as a dreamer is the one who changes the world. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. They weren't just seeing the numbers. They were seeing themselves reflected back in every line of text, every projection of their own words. I let the screens fade to black and returned to my seat. Do you know the hardest part? I asked softly. Not the secrecy, not pretending to struggle. It was watching you celebrate mediocrity while dismissing real innovation. Marcus bristled. Mediocrity, I built a stable career. I followed the plan. Exactly, I said. You followed. You never imagined. You never risked. And you, I turned to Olivia. You bragged about a 6-figure salary while I was earning that much before breakfast. She dropped her gaze, unable to respond. The room trembled with unspoken truths. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt the weight shift. The power was no longer theirs. It was mine. But the dinner wasn't over. The storm hadn't reached its peak. But in that moment, I knew the tide had turned. The weight of the silence pressed down harder than the sound of any argument. My family sat trapped at the table, their reflections staring back at them in the glossy marble surface. The evidence was undeniable. Their words, once weapons, had been forged into the very pillars of my empire. My father's voice finally broke the stillness. Enough. You've made your point. We were wrong. Is that what you wanted to hear? I shook my head. No, Dad. I don't want hollow words spoken out of shock. I want you to understand. Really understand. This I gestured around the hall at the ocean views. The framed articles, the silent staff waiting in the shadows is not about money. It's about vision. Vision you refuse to see because you clung to the past. I pressed the remote again. The screens lit up with a new image, brighter, bolder. Designs for a platform unlike anything my family or the world had seen before. This, I continued, launches next month. Conservative estimates place its value at $10 billion. It will redefine how digital art is created, bought, and shared. And for once, I want you to see it before it happens. No more dismissing, no more doubting. The room fell into a stunned hush. My mother clasped her hands together, her knuckles white. Marcus leaned back, his face pale, eyes darting across the screen, as if trying to measure what he was seeing against everything he thought he knew. Olivia sat frozen, her lips parted, a quiet protest dying in her throat. You're saying this will be bigger than everything you've already built, Marcus whispered. Yes, I said simply, and it's only the beginning. My father rose abruptly from his chair. Do you expect us to just applaud, to forget the years you lied to us? I stood too, meeting his anger with calm resolve. I never lied. I let you believe what you wanted to. You were so sure I was failing that you never looked closer. You didn't want the truth. You wanted control. His jaw tightened, but he had no answer. I took a slow breath, then lowered my voice. What I want now is not your apology, not your approval. I want you to recognize that the world has changed, and I changed it while you weren't watching. Olivia finally spoke, her voice trembling. So what happens now? You've humiliated us. You've thrown our words back in our faces. What do you expect? I looked at her, then at the others. I expect nothing. But tomorrow I will show you more. The island, the studios, the galleries, the future. Tonight was just the first step. Tomorrow you'll see the rest. They exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the storm wasn't over. Tonight had been revelation, but what was coming would be transformation. And here's the truth. What happened the next day was far more shocking than this dinner. If you think the confrontation ended with a slideshow and harsh words, you're wrong. What unfolded on the island the following morning changed everything. Stay with me, because the twist you're about to hear is the one they never saw coming. The next morning dawned bright and merciless. Sunlight spilled across the island, gleaming on glass walls and polished stone, casting long shadows over the grounds I had built in silence. From my balcony, I watched as my family gathered for breakfast. Their movements were hesitant, subdued. The arrogance that once clung to them had begun to crack. I could see Marcus stirring his coffee with restless energy, Olivia staring at her phone as if searching for a distraction, my parents speaking in clipped, hushed tones. Even my aunts and cousins seemed unsettled, their designer clothes and forced smiles out of place against the scale of my world. It was time to peel back another layer. Good morning, I greeted them as I entered the dining hall. My voice carried easily, steady as the ocean beyond the windows. I trust you slept well. My father cleared his throat. Emily, this spectacle is unnecessary. We are family. We could have met at the resort as planned. The resort was public, I replied evenly. Too many eyes, too many ways to dismiss the truth. Here you cannot look away. I motioned toward the folders placed neatly at each seat. You've already seen the documents tailored for each of you. Marcus, you now know how much your firm lost when it refused to partner with me. Olivia, you saw how your annual salary compares to my daily interest. And Dad? I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. You saw how the $1 million you refused to invest would now be worth $100 million. His face tightened, but he said nothing. Today you will see more, I continued. The studios, the galleries, the future this island represents. You will see the empire I built while you believed I was failing. Olivia slammed her folder shut. You planned this, every detail. You wanted to humiliate us. No, I said calmly. I wanted to reveal the truth. Humiliation comes only from denial. If you feel it, it's because you cannot reconcile what you believed with what stands before you. The room fell silent. Outside, waves crashed against the shore, steady and relentless. I let the silence stretch before adding, "You've celebrated mediocrity while dismissing vision. You praised obedience while mocking innovation. You believed your map of the world was the only one that mattered, and now you sit in a world I created without your help." My mother whispered, "Emily, we should have listened. We should have believed in you." Her voice trembled, and for a fleeting second, I saw the mother I had once longed for, supportive, proud, loving. But that moment passed quickly, buried under years of condescension. "I don't need your pride," I told her gently. "I never did. What I needed was freedom, and I claimed it." I rose from the table, gesturing for them to follow. "Come, there's more to see." They obeyed silently, filing out of the hall behind me. For the first time in 15 years, I led and they followed. The reversal was intoxicating. As we walked across the island toward the gallery, I glanced back at them, my family once towering over me with their judgments, now dwarfed by what I had built. What about you? Have you ever taken control of a story that others tried to write for you? Have you ever turned doubt into fuel? Share it with me in the comments. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe now. Your support helps me bring every hidden chapter into the light. Because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what they would learn on my island. The tour of the island was deliberate, every step another unveiling of what I had built. We moved past manicured gardens, through galleries filled with digital masterpieces, into studios, where developers and artists worked side by side. My family trailed behind me, their silence louder than words. Each room stripped away another piece of their denial. When we reached the central pavilion, I stopped before a wall of glass overlooking the ocean. Behind us, massive screens displayed the trajectory of my empire, numbers rising like waves, milestones, stacking higher than any of them had imagined possible. "This is what you dismissed," I said quietly. "This is what you called foolish, a fad, a scam." My father's face was pale. For years, his voice had been the loudest, the final word in every conversation. Now he stood mute, confronted with a reality that mocked his certainty. Olivia finally broke the silence, her voice brittle. "So, you've proven your point. You're rich. You're powerful. But what did you lose by hiding this 15 years of family? 15 years of truth?" I turned to her, meeting her glare with calm resolve. "I didn't lose. I built. And while you were busy measuring success in salaries and vacation homes, I was building something that would outlast all of us." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. His pride had always been tied to the firm, to the belief that he carried our father's legacy. Now that legacy looked small beside what I had achieved. The sun dipped lower, casting the room in gold. That was when my father finally spoke. "Why, Emily? Why hide it from us for so long? Was it revenge?" I shook my head slowly. "It was survival. If I had told you when it mattered most, you would have crushed it. You would have pulled me back into the mold you made for all of us. I gave you exactly what you wanted to see, and it gave me the freedom to create this." His eyes dropped, and for the first time I saw something unfamiliar in him: regret. That evening, after the formal tour ended and the family retired to their suites, I returned alone to the dining hall. Moonlight spilled across the marble floors. On the long table lay an envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I was wrong. Not just about the business, but about everything. "You didn't just succeed, you revolutionized an industry. I'm sorry I couldn't see it sooner." I stood there for a long time, the words blurring as the weight of them sank in. My father had never apologized to me, not once in my life. And now, here it was, a confession in black ink. I placed the letter in a frame beside my very first NFT receipt for $50,000. One symbolized where I started, the other symbolized how far I had come. The next morning, my family gathered again, but the air was different. The sharp edges of denial had dulled. Conversations were tentative, awkward, but not dismissive. For the first time, I felt seen, and yet I didn't need their recognition anymore. The victory wasn't in proving them wrong, it was in proving myself right. I raised my glass at breakfast, to vision, to freedom, to building the world we imagine even when no one else believes in it. They raised their glasses too, some reluctantly, some with genuine warmth. And in that moment, I knew the balance of power had shifted forever. Like, the storm had passed, but its impact remained. I had shown them who I was, and now there was no going back to the shadows. The final evening of the reunion arrived with the sea breeze carrying a calmness that contrasted with the storm of revelations that had shaken us all. My family gathered in the great hall once again, but this time their expressions carried something different. Less pride, less denial, more humility. Dinner was served on a long table that glittered with crystal and silver. The walls around us still displayed the framed Forbes articles, each a reminder of what had been hidden for 15 years. Yet the tension that had weighed down every meal was lighter now, softened by the shift none of them could ignore. I rose from my seat, glass in hand. For years I began these gatherings were moments I dreaded. I knew every word, every look would remind me that I had failed to meet your expectations. Tonight, it is different. Tonight we sit as equals, no, not as equals, but as people finally seeing one another clearly. Marcus lowered his gaze, but I saw the flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her pride bruised, but she did not speak. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, fighting tears, while my father's face was unreadable, the letter he had written still echoing in my mind. You always asked me when I would grow up, when I would take life seriously, I continued. What you never understood is that I was serious from the beginning. I saw something you could not. And while you clung to tradition, I chose freedom. That freedom built everything you see around you. I paused, letting the words settle. The irony is that while you pitied me, I was building a future not just for myself, but for countless artists who were told the same lies you told me, that their vision had no value. My empire is not built on money alone. It is built on belief. The room was silent. The only sound was the ocean beyond the glass, steady and eternal. I set my glass down. Tomorrow I'll show you more of what we've built here. But tonight let's do something we've never done before. Let's have dinner as a family, without pretense, without pity, without masks. Slowly the tension cracked. Conversations began halting at first, then warmer. Laughter returned in small bursts, tentative but real. For the first time in years, I felt less like the outsider and more like the anchor. And yet deep down, I knew this reunion was not about reconciliation. It was about revelation. My family could change or not, it no longer mattered. What mattered was that I no longer carried the weight of their disbelief. I had shown them who I was. I leaned back in my chair, watching them with a calm smile. This was the closure I had waited for. And here is where I leave you with a choice. You followed me through 15 years of silence, sacrifice, and revelation. But this isn't the end. Tomorrow, I reveal the next chapter, an even greater vision. One that reshapes not just my family's world, but perhaps the world itself. If you want to see what comes next, make sure you subscribe and stay with me. Because the story of freedom, vision, and truth doesn't stop here, it only grows. The morning after the reunion, the island was quiet. The waves rolled gently against the shore. The palm trees swayed in the soft breeze, and sunlight spilled across the resort like a blessing. I walked barefoot along the sand, my footprints fading as quickly as they appeared, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 15 years ago, I was the outcast the dreamer dismissed, the daughter doubted, the sister pitied. Every holiday dinner, every sharp remark, every sigh of disappointment carved a scar. Yet those scars became the map that led me to freedom. In their disbelief, I found determination. In their control, I discovered my own sovereignty. The empire I built is measured in billions, yes, but its true value lies elsewhere. It lies in the artists who now create without fear, in the innovators who dare to imagine new worlds, in the quiet knowledge that I trusted my vision when no one else did. Last night my father left me a letter admitting he was wrong. I framed it beside the receipt of my first NFT sale, $50,000 that once seemed impossible. Those two pieces of paper tell the whole story, where I began and what I became. As the ocean stretched endlessly before me, I realized the sweetest victory was not in proving them wrong, but in proving myself right. I no longer need their approval nor their pride. I have my own, and with that, I am free. No more masks, no more silence, only truth and the boundless horizon ahead.